Ever wondered why English grammar is so important and how it can be easy to learn? Well, let's unpack that together. English grammar, friends, is the backbone of effective communication. It's the magical tool that helps us to express our thoughts, ideas, and feelings in a way that is clear and precise. It's the ticket that allows us to board the train of understanding and connection with others. Now, you may be thinking, English grammar sounds complicated. But here's the good news. It doesn't have to be. In fact, learning English grammar can be as enjoyable as sipping a cup of your favorite coffee. With the right resources and mindset, it can be an exciting journey of discovery and growth. So, are you ready to dive into the fascinating world of English grammar? Stay tuned. English grammar has 8 parts of speech. Do you know what they are? Firstly, we have a noun. This is a word that identifies a person, place, thing, or idea. For example, dog, city, happiness, and teacher are all nouns. Next, we have pronouns. Pronouns are words that take the place of nouns. They help us avoid repetition in our speech and writing. Words like he, she, it, they, and we are pronouns. Thirdly, there are verbs. Verbs are action words. They tell us what a person or thing is doing. Words like run, eat, think, and create are all verbs. Adjectives are next on our list. These are words that describe or modify nouns. They give more information about a noun's size, color, age, shape, or material. For instance, red, big, old, and round are all adjectives. Following adjectives, we have adverbs. Adverbs modify verbs, adjectives, or other adverbs. They tell us how, when, where, how much, and with what frequency something happens. Words like quickly, never, very, and well are examples of adverbs. Next up, we have prepositions. These are words that show a relationship between a noun or pronoun and some other word in the sentence. Common prepositions include in, on, at, by, and with. The 7th part of speech is conjunctions. Conjunctions are words that join words, phrases, or clauses together. Words like and, but, or, and yet are conjunctions. Finally, we have interjections. These are words or phrases that express strong emotion. They are often followed by an exclamation point. Examples include oh, wow, hooray, and oops. Knowing these parts of speech is the first step to mastering English grammar. What makes a sentence complete? It's all about the structure. In English, the simplest and most common structure for a sentence is the subject-verb-object or SVO order. This is the basic template we use to express thoughts and convey information. Let's break it down. The subject is the who or what that the sentence is about. It's the doer, the star of the sentence. The verb is the action that the subject is performing. And the object, that's what's receiving the action. Let's take a simple sentence as an example. The cat chases the mouse. Here, the cat is our subject, the one doing the action. Chases is our verb, the action that's happening. And the mouse is the object, the one receiving the action of the verb. But what about a sentence without an object, like birds fly? Here, birds is our subject and fly is our verb. There's no object in this sentence, and that's perfectly fine. Not all sentences need an object. Now let's mix it up a bit. How about a sentence with multiple subjects or objects? Try, Jack and Jill fetched a pail of water. Jack and Jill are our subjects. Fetched is our verb, and a pail of water is our object. And remember, while SVO is the most common structure, English allows for flexibility. You might see sentences in a different order for emphasis or style. For example, around the corner raced the dog. Here, the verb raced comes before the subject, the dog. This is less common but totally valid. Understanding this basic structure is key to forming your own sentences and understanding others. It's like building blocks. Once you know how to stack them, you can start creating towers, castles, entire cities of thought and expression. So, to recap, the most common English sentence structure is subject-verb-object. Understanding this structure is like having a map to navigate the landscape of English communication. A well-structured sentence is the backbone of good English communication. Tenses tell us when an action took place. But how many tenses are there in English? Let's dive right into it. In the English language, we have 3 main tenses: past, present, and future. Each of these tenses tells us when an action occurs. The past tense tells us about actions that have already happened. The present tense describes actions that are happening now or habits and facts. The future tense, as you might guess, is all about actions that will happen. But wait, there's more. Each of these 3 main tenses has 4 aspects: simple, continuous, perfect, and perfect continuous. That's right. We have a total of 12 tenses in English. These aspects help us to express more specific time frames within the past, present, and future. Let's break these aspects down. The simple aspect is used for actions that are completed, habitual, or factual. For instance, I read, and I will read. The continuous aspect, also known as progressive, is used for ongoing actions. For example, I was reading, I am reading, and I will be reading. Next, we have the perfect aspect. This is used for actions completed before other actions or specific times. Like, I had read, I have read, and I will have read. Lastly, the perfect continuous aspect combines the perfect and continuous aspects. It's used for actions that were ongoing before other actions or specific times. For instance, I had been reading, I have been reading, and I will have been reading. So to sum up, we have three main tenses: past, present, and future. Each of these has four aspects: simple, continuous, perfect, and perfect continuous. That gives us a grand total of 12 different ways to express when an action takes place. Understanding tenses helps us to express time accurately in English. So keep practicing and you'll master these tenses in no time. Did you know that the same sentence can be expressed in two different ways in English? This brings us to the concept of active and passive voice, an essential ingredient to spice up your English expressions. Active voice is when the subject of the sentence is doing the action. For instance, consider the sentence, John eats an apple. Here, John is the subject, and he is doing the action of eating the apple. It's direct, clear, and most sentences in English are in the active voice. Now let's flip it to the passive voice. In passive voice, the subject of the sentence is being acted upon. So, our previous sentence changes to, the apple is eaten by John. The apple, now the subject, is receiving the action. It's a bit roundabout, isn't it? But it has its uses. You might be wondering, when do we use passive voice? Excellent question. Passive voice is used when the focus is on the action itself, or when the doer of the action is unknown or irrelevant. For instance, in a sentence like, the cake was eaten, we don't know who ate the cake, and it doesn't really matter. What's important is that the cake is no more. In the world of writing, active voice is often preferred for its directness. But don't shun the passive voice altogether. It's particularly useful in formal writing, like scientific reports, where the focus is on the result rather than who achieved it. Here's a quick tip to identify the passive voice. Look for any form of the verb to be, followed by a past participle. If you see this, you're probably looking at a passive sentence. Remember, both active and passive voice have their place in English. It's all about what you want to emphasize, the doer or the action. Variety, after all, is the spice of life, and the same applies to language. Mastering active and passive voice adds variety to your English expressions, so don't hesitate to experiment with both in your English journey. We use direct and indirect speech to report what someone else has said. But what's the difference? Well, direct speech is when we quote someone's words exactly as they said them. For instance, if your friend John says, I love playing soccer on Saturdays, we can report this in direct speech by saying, John said, I love playing soccer on Saturdays. On the other hand, indirect speech, also known as reported speech, is when we express what someone else has said, but we don't use their exact words. So using the same example, we'd say, John said that he loves playing soccer on Saturdays. Now, let's talk about the changes that occur when we switch from direct to indirect speech. First up, verb tenses. Typically, the verb tenses in indirect speech shift back in time. For instance, the present simple tense, I love, becomes he loves. The past simple, I loved, turns into he had loved, and so on. Next, we have pronouns. These often change based on the speaker and the listener. In our example, the first person pronoun I in direct speech becomes he in indirect speech, referring to John. Lastly, we have references to time and place. Words like here and now in direct speech usually change according to the context in indirect speech. For instance, I am here now in direct speech might become, he said that he was there then in indirect speech. Understanding these transformations is key to mastering direct and indirect speech. It's like a dance, where the words twist and turn, changing form but keeping the essence of the message intact. And just like any dance, it becomes easier with practice. So the next time you're reporting what someone else said, remember these rules. Whether you're quoting a friend's funny comment or reporting a piece of news, your ability to switch between direct and indirect speech will come in handy. Direct and indirect speech are essential for effective English conversation. So, let's keep the conversation going, shall we? We've covered a lot of ground today in our exploration of English grammar basics. Let's take a moment to revisit the key points we've discussed. We delved into the parts of speech, those building blocks of language that include nouns, verbs, adjectives, and more. We then moved on to sentence structure, understanding how these parts fit together to form clear and meaningful sentences. Our journey continued through the domain of tenses, the time frames that give context to our sentences. We also shed light on the active and passive voices, showing how the subject in a sentence can act or be acted upon. Lastly, we examined direct and indirect speech, learning how to report what others have said. Remember, mastering English grammar is a journey, and every journey begins with a single step. Keep practicing and you'll surely get there. Thank you for joining us today, and see you next time.